you're watching BloombergQuint and the second episode of a new series that we started last year on leadership. The first episode was with Harsh Mariwala, where we spoke about leadership and failure. And then, unfortunately, in March, the pandemic hit us, and it didn't quite seem appropriate to be talking about leadership at a time when the business community was struggling for survival. Well, things did seem to look a little better till a few weeks ago, which is when I reached out to Rajiv Bajaj to ask him if he would feature on this show as its second guest. Now, he said yes. Things have turned a little bit since then in the COVID situation, but I'm glad we're doing this conversation today. My world has been full of Rajiv Bajajisms since he said yes a few weeks ago. You ask him about success strategy, he'll say FIT, that's fit. That's focus, idea, team. You ask him about his marketing mantra, he'll say 7-2-1. There are some more non-numerical ones. Do less, doing more, never works. Great brands are built on the foundation of sacrifices. Products sell, but brands profit. He quotes Jack Trout, Rishi Vashisht, principles of homeopathy and yoga, all with equal ease. And after 2 decades, I think, of Rajiv's leadership, Bajaj Auto is now not only the most valuable two-wheeler company in India, but also across the world. I believe they crossed that landmark in January this year. Thank you very much for appearing on this leadership series.
Thank you for your introduction. Thank you.
All right. Rajiv, let me start by asking you what leadership means to you. And the reason why I ask is who you were, let's say in the mid-90s when you joined Bajaj and who you are today. That in itself must have been an incredible journey. I'd like for you to talk about how your perspective on leadership has changed in the over 2 decades.
Well, Menaka, I would actually say that I think leadership is grossly overvalued. If you look at what Carl Jung said, he said the true leader is always led. Since you quoted something from Sage Vashisht, let's go back to the Upanishads that say that while power may be vested with the king, true authority rests with dharma, not the king. So the question we have to ask ourselves is that not who is the king of the business or the organization, but what is the dharma of the organization? And my interpretation is that it is the strategy of the company, which you can call as its vision or its direction or its purpose, that actually leads the company. So my 30 years at Bajaj, since 19th of December 1990, has really been invested in trying to define as robust a strategy as possible, which also means a simple, self-evident strategy. And I like to say one that should be self-evident and imminently clear to everyone from the chairman to the watchman. Only then can such a strategy align a company, have us all working as one in the same direction. And if you're able to do that reasonably well, then I think to me that is, maybe that's not all what leadership is about, but that is what is most important when it comes to leadership.
Did your view on leadership, was it different when you first joined? Because you did join as the son of the promoter family, and I would imagine that you knew very well that you were going to be taking on the mantle of leadership. So I'm just curious to see what the evolution of that journey has been.
So I came into Bajaj at a very interesting time. At that point, we were largely a scooter maker. Almost everything we made was sold in the domestic market. And I joined as a manufacturing engineer because that is what I had studied for my master's degree. And it was an interesting opportunity for me because there was still a 1.5-year waiting period for the Bajaj scooter at that time. And I said to myself, hey, if I can apply some of what I have learned to the manufacturing process and make it more productive, then we can produce more scooters, and that would be great for the company. So I spent the first 5 years until 95 doing that. By the end of that, we were pretty much able to make everything that we needed to. In fact, we had stock on the shelves, but nobody wanted to buy our scooters anymore. So this led me to my next responsibility at Bajaj, which was product development. And up until then, Bajaj really didn't have even one successful new product to its credit. Everything that we were successful doing, we had inherited from Vespa in terms of the scooter and the three-wheeler. And that is still the case, if I may say so, with some of our competition in this country, that they are still churning out the old and have not demonstrated the ability to do the new. So this was our situation in 1995 as well. And for the next 5 years, I worked with colleagues, including Abraham Joseph, who is now our CTO, to build a R&D for the future. And I did that till about 2000. That's the time over which the Pulsar was developed. And we started production at our new plant in Chakan. But then we found that we can make stuff and we can develop stuff, but we don't actually know how to market stuff, And I learned later from Jack Trout, who told me, you cannot sell, you can only supply a reason to buy. So this whole thing that we sell is a wrong notion, I discovered. You have to supply a reason for the consumer to walk in and buy, if you want to sell profitably, that is. And that's why then I turned my attention to marketing and sales, particularly to global markets, because up until then, Bajaj was essentially a domestic player. And for the next 5 years, that is what I did. I tried to, although I was not trained for that, but I tried to work with some of the better marketing and sales people to build a robust marketing organization. So this is how I spent the first 15 years. And so I would not say that I started with a roadmap of what I would be doing for the first 15, 20 years. I have a great passion for homeopathy. In fact, people say motorcycles are my hobby. My real passion is homeopathy. And one of the principles of homeopathy is each dose shows the way to the next dose. You wait and watch, you observe, and you don't think too much. So I was merely observing as market shifted, as competition evolved, as Bajaj had to adapt. I found my next chapter and next chapter and next chapter in my book.
You showed incredible courage of conviction in the face of critics, in the face of, a market that didn't necessarily immediately validate what you were doing. When you ditched scooters and focused Bajaj Autos, I think every rupee, every man, every resource, as you put it, on motorcycles. I'm just curious, Rajiv, where does that courage come from? I mean, is it something inherently born in leaders? Did you have any moments of self-doubt? Because the market didn't immediately validate what you were doing. And do you really think that if you want a Bajaj, you would have had the appetite for that kind of risk?
It is not a sign of courage, Menaka. It is, in fact, paranoia. And as Andy Grove said, only the paranoid survive. Right. I tried to ask myself, looking around and reflecting on what had happened to various companies in different parts of the world over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And what I saw was this. I saw that in the last 50 years, the only new successful auto company in the world was Hyundai. Other than Hyundai coming out of South Korea and doing really well over time, there was no new company that had survived and sustained. So it was very clear to me that in an industry where technology had by and large saturated, you had to compete on something else. Let's go back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. What did companies compete on? They competed in operational terms. The phrase was QCD. You competed on quality, cost, delivery, perhaps also in managing the environment and labor in closed markets. Then came some technological disruption in the 80s and 90s, at least as far as we were concerned, when scooters shifted to motorcycles or started shifting to motorcycles, four-stroke engines came in, fuel injection came in, etc., etc. Maybe not new to the rest of the world, but certainly quite new for this market. But by the end of the 90s, that was also done. So now if you're not competing on operational metrics and you're not competing on technology, then what do you compete on? I realized that you need to compete on differentiation, because even if technology is the same for everyone, you still need to create, if not the reality, the perception that I have something to offer that nobody else does. It goes back to the same need to supply a reason to buy. And in doing so, I found that companies that have followed what is my marketing mantra number one, which is narrow your focus, or as you said earlier, do less and not more, are the companies that have succeeded. I mean, for the longest time, for example, Harley Davidson making 300,000 motorcycles had a greater valuation than General Motors making 9 million cars, because Harley was in the brand business and GM was in the commodity business. So it became very clear to me that, like any doctor, like any chef, like any artist, like any sports person, if you want to be a global champion, you have to invest every man, every minute, and every rupee in doing one thing better than anybody else in the world. And then when I looked at the world of two-wheelers, I saw that whether by volume or by value or by profitability, motorcycles were twice as big as scooters. So for me, it was a no-brainer that Bajaj Auto must chase the motorcycle mountain till such time as it can be one of the best, whatever that means, motorcycle makers in the world. And then we may have, the bandwidth to turn our attention to doing a second thing. Nobody succeeds doing two big things at the same time. So to me, it was not a courageous decision. It was an obvious decision. And in fact, it was a risk-averse decision.
Was there no moment of self-doubt?
No, none at all, because all the time I could see around myself, I won't name them, but competition in India and even outside of India, trying to do the exact opposite. Because the problem you see with marketing stroke strategy is that it is extremely contra-intuitive, because it relies on differentiation, and differentiation by definition means you are doing something that nobody else is doing. Whereas most people think intuitively, and nothing is more intuitive than herd mentality. So, when the herd is headed in one direction, you can either panic because you are not, or you can derive confidence from that, because it is said that if you want to succeed, you have to be reading something that nobody else is reading, doing something that nobody else is doing. So I was very confident that all these people who are headed in the other direction are headed in the wrong direction, and over time it was becoming clear that one after the other they were failing. Again, I won't name them, but even in the last few days, there is so much news out there about one such so-called conglomerate, or whatever you call it, that has slowly done away with all their indiscretions, come back to their core, and suddenly the market is rewarding them. In fact, there's two of them out there. So I could see that that these people are paying a heavy price, continuing to propagate their hubris, because it is very difficult for the human ego to be able to pause, breathe, accept that you're wrong, not be in a state of denial, and change course. I mean, very few people do that till they absolutely have greatness thrust upon them. So I had no self-doubt at all. It was very clear to me that keeping it simple as we had done was the best way forward.
The second, very successful decision you've made, besides betting on motorcycles, is taking this company global. You now serve almost 70 countries, from what I understand. Almost 40% of your revenue comes from, the export of motorcycles. Again, I know there's a backstory to this. I know you said somewhere, and I read this in an interview, that you went to your father in the early years and you asked him what he thought the road ahead for you was, and he said, be the best in everything you can do. And you asked him what the best meant, and he said global. And that maybe was one reason why you set off on this journey. It's proven business-wise successful for you. I go back to the ability to take risks. You keep telling me it's not the ability to take risks, it's actually the terrible fear of failure that prompts you to do this. Was it the same logic that applied to how you went about doing exports?
Actually, making motorcycles and going global are two sides of the same coin. It is because my father said to me that his aspiration was for Bajaj to be a global company. That was my cue to say, fine, in that case, we need to narrow our focus to motorcycles and become one of the best motorcycles manufacturers in the world. So one thing led to the other. They were not independent things. And even at that time, our goal was never to be the biggest motorcycle maker, because we had seen over the years amongst other people like Toyota and Volkswagen, in the pursuit of volumes, make all kinds of mistakes, from airbags going off when they shouldn't, accelerator and brake pedals not working the way they should, and of course the emission scandal and stuff like that. So, and those CEOs had acknowledged that the pursuit of volume can be very inimical to the business. So our goal was never to be number one in volume terms. Our goal actually was to be the most versatile motorcycle maker in the world. And I think we have been able to achieve that, because we have a business model where on the one extreme, we are shipping a motorcycle brand called Boxer to Africa, from having entered Africa only about 15 years back, we are now, the Boxer is one of every 3 motorcycles sold in Africa. So it's been very successful. But because of the market that Africa is, we have to ship the motorcycle for as little as $400 and still find a way to make money on that. And on the other hand, we are shipping the ready-to-race KTM high-performance motorcycles to developed markets like the US, Europe, Japan, and Australia for as much as 4,000-6,000 euros. So that's the retail price. So out of the same kitchen, to have the ability to build such horses for courses, where you are able to build a number of brands, maybe we have 8 or 10 such brands. Each of them has a clear purpose, a clear segment, a clear price point that has to be met, a clear specification to be competitive against whoever is our competition in that segment. To be able to make all of this out of one organization is very, very unusual. And I don't know a second maker in the world, in our industry, who's able to do this. I mean, in Africa, for example, the manufacturers out of the West are not able to compete at all. You don't find BMWs and Ducatis and KTMs and Harley Davidsons there, of course. On the other hand, in the developed markets where we are present through KTM and Husqvarna, you don't find, for example, Chinese makers or even Indian makers there. So Bajaj is probably the only company that can straddle the 70+ countries, across the globe. And that is a versatility we have achieved that we are very proud of.
Two quick follow-up questions to that, because so far we're talking about the two, sort of arms of your very successful strategy, motorcycles and exports. Do you think it in any way takes away from what your brand means when it can mean a $400 motorcycle or a 6,000 euro motorcycle? That's one question. And secondly, how did you accomplish the ability to serve out of your kitchen both these extreme ends of the market?
So the answer to the first question is that I never thought of Bajaj as being, people refer to it as a roof brand, that Bajaj is the roof under which we conduct our business. I always thought of Bajaj as the root brand. Bajaj is the root from which we have come. And more specifically, Bajaj is our B2B brand. So I am an employee of Bajaj Auto. Somebody else is a supplier or a dealer of Bajaj Auto. Somebody is a banker of Bajaj Auto. Somebody is a shareholder of Bajaj Auto. But this is all B2B. As far as the customer is concerned, Bajaj is really not the B2C brand. I mean, nobody came into my dealership saying, "Ek Bajaj ka motorcycle dikhao." He will say, "Show me a CT, show me a Platina, show me a Pulsar, show me an Avenger, show me your latest Dominar, KTM, etc." So the B2C brand, as much as it is Lux and Dove and Lifebuoy, it is CT and Platina and Pulsar and Avenger. I think this is very, very key to our strategy. And that is why a CT may stand or a Boxer may stand for a $400 motorcycle, but a Dominar stands for a 200,000 rupee motorcycle. And consumers are able to comprehend this. They know all of this comes from Unilever or P&G or Bajaj, and that's fine. So we don't mix up the B2B brand with the B2C brand, particularly in terms of how we brand it, our products, and how we communicate our products. Sorry, what was your second question? Yeah, how did we achieve this?
How do you manufacture all of this from the same kitchen, right? What did it take? to be able to do that.
So,
And I'm talking more about approach and mindset than, where
yeah,
you sourced your materials from, right?
yeah, certainly. So there's two parts to it. See, the key is alignment between what you do at the front end and what you do at the back end. Now, at the front end, um, we don't compete with 40 different brands, as very often you will find our competitors to do. We don't have just one brand. As I just said, we have about 10 or 12 brands. So not too few, not too many. Very sharp brands, each with a very distinct purpose. And then at the back end, what is important for us is less frugality, but more modularity. Because in an uncertain world, and the world has been uncertain not just for the last 12 months, but always where there is competition, the world will be uncertain. You have to be extremely flexible to adapt. As I was saying before, you can't think, you can't plan. I mean, the days of the 5-year plan are long gone. You are almost living by the day, by the week, and continuously adjusting yourself as you would do in a yoga asana to find the next level of comfort in a new situation. So in this situation, how you design both your product and process to be modular is very, very key. So in the product context, it is called a product platform. It may be an engine platform, transmission platform, frame platform, suspension platform, brake platform, etc. So you ensure a certain modularity. Now, obviously, you have to strike a balance there between, on the one hand, doing what's right for a brand, what will appeal to the customer, and yet maintaining as much commonality as you can in parts. And two, in terms of your process, you make sure that through the same assembly line, paint line, weld line, machining line, you can put all this through. So when you have done this, you have largely de-risked yourself against any change in mix. And now if you are able to align these two correctly, for example, at our Chakan plant in Pune, which we call as our manufacturing laboratory, we make the high-end motorcycles with modular product and process platforms. On the other hand, in our Waluj and Pantnagar plant, we make our more, the 100, 125 cc motorcycles, the more lower priced and higher volume motorcycles, again with the modularity that is right for those products with those processes. So when you build a modular kitchen like this and align it correctly to the brands that they are serving, I think then you can achieve this versatility.
I want to talk, we've spoken about success quite a bit and how you've gotten here. I want to talk about failure before I suggest things that maybe didn't work to plan. Let me ask you an open-ended question on what you would consider moments of failure or strategies that didn't work or products that didn't work over the last 3 decades.
I'm going to give you a somewhat vague answer, Menaka, in the sense that I really believe in what someone said, which is this, that if a victory is looked in sufficient detail, one cannot distinguish it from failure. See, look at my first 5 years in Bajaj. When I joined the company, we were making 154 scooters on an assembly line in a single shift. I thought it could be 190, or I was working with a team of people and we thought that it could be 190. We achieved that. But 3 months later, it looked like it could be 210. And then it became something like 250 or something. And over the years, it has become 1,200 vehicles per line, per shift. Now, does it mean that 190 was a failure, 210 was a failure, or was it a success? So I think the only failure to me in a business context can be when you deviate from principle. As someone said, before we start with the process of possibilities, we must begin with the purity of principles. We stuck to our principles, whether it was our marketing principles, our manufacturing principles, or the alignment between the two. As long as you stay with principle, I would insist that everything is nothing but a stepping stone to the next improvement that you can make. So in that sense, I would be immodest and say that I don't think we have ever failed. But at the same time, we have had lots of opportunity for improvement. Let me give you an example when it comes to technology. I mean, we made our first 4-stroke scooter in the form of a Legend, scooter called Legend. It was a good scooter. But today, after 20 years, we are able to make a four-stroke engine that is far superior to what we made in 1996. Does it mean that we failed in 1996? I don't think so. As long as you are on the path of improvement, I don't think there is any failure.
Some might argue that, year after year, you keep admitting and acknowledging that your domestic market position needs to improve, but you're not necessarily able to do that. Now, I know your counter to that is going to be holding price points, market share not being more important than profitability, and I get that. But yet, I think there has been a considerable decline. You are now maybe the fourth player in the domestic market, or third. The positions keep changing. You don't consider that as a failure, because there are products that haven't worked. There are products that had too many variations. There are products that didn't quite hit the spot, if I can call it that, as a result of which your position has been 3 or now 4.
Yeah, I don't count us as a two-wheeler maker because we are a motorcycle maker. And in the motorcycle industry, we are number 2, after Hero, of course. And in the domestic market, we are a distant number 2. Now, the issue with this is that Hero had first mover advantage with the 100cc motorcycle, and in India, outsells are something like 4:1 in that segment. Look at the export scenario. We were first mover on exports. We outsell Hero probably 10 or 15:1. So when you are a global maker, serving 70 plus countries, you cannot expect to be number 1 in every country. I don't know any brand and any manufacturer that's been able to achieve that. Having said that, I will still, let me try and put it like this. I have found that in a business context, in terms of brands and products, there are only 2 reasons for failure when we do fail. One is line extension. When you extend the brand to do much more than it should be doing, when you diffuse the brand, when you forget what made it successful in the first place, and then, in trying to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. This happened to us with our Discover. It didn't happen to us with any other brand. 2, which hopefully we've not been guilty of, is too little defense. What I mean by that is when we have market-leading products like a Platina or a Pulsar, or even our 3-wheeler, or even KTM now in its segment, if you get complacent, if you allow quality to deteriorate, if you allow cost to spiral out of control, if your customer-facing organization isn't sensitive to the customer, you're not defending your leadership. So hopefully we have not been guilty of that, though one can always do better in that regard. So these are the only 2 things that matter, I have realized. 1, do not diffuse your brand, and 2, do not fail to defend your brand once you've built a leadership brand, by which I mean a number 1 or number 2 brand. As long as one is not guilty of these 2, I think of everything else as an opportunity for improvement.
Does it not matter to you if you're not number 1 at all in the domestic market? Because I know you can't be number 1 in every market. This is your home market. This is half your revenue.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, absolutely. There is not a single day that passes without our asking ourselves, how can we do better in this market, which is the largest motorcycle market in the world? But it has to be done in a manner that is strategically sound, is all that we say to ourselves. I mean, obviously, one can't go out and put prices down by 10% and hope to gain share, because that is never going to work. Because if nothing else, the leader can do the same thing 3 days later. One can't go out and make a dramatically different product because it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We are in a technologically saturated industry, as I said before. So that is why we need to do something other than price, and pull on a lever that is not price or technology. That should be the lever of differentiation. The problem with that, and it's obviously management's responsibility to overcome that problem. The problem is that when you want to create differentiation in a 5 lakh rupee motorcycle, it's relatively easier as it is in a 50 lakh rupee car. But if you want to create differentiation in a 2 lakh rupee car or a 3 lakh rupee car to take on Maruti, you will struggle because the consumer is not willing to pay you more than a few rupees more. And how do you make something remarkably different happen for a few rupees more? This is the challenge, Now, either one can be pig-headed about it and say that, nahi, main phir bhi karunga, but then in the end, you will only have, blood on your nose to show for that. So how does one approach this problem? Our approach, I'll share with you. Our approach is to say that it is very difficult, particularly in this situation, to win intra-segment. It is very difficult for me to take away a 100cc motorcycle from the leader with another 100cc motorcycle. It has never happened in the world, hence it is unlikely to happen. The only sustainable strategy can be to win inter-segment. I have to inspire people to move from a 100cc to my area of strength. It may be to move down to a 70cc motorcycle, if there can be such a thing, or to move up to a 125, 150cc motorcycle. But that process takes time. I mean, today, there was a time when 100cc motorcycles was 90% of the market, let's say, 20 years back or whenever. Today, it is down to 50% of the market. So it's not that that shift is not taking place, but one has to be patient with that.
Okay. And then, again, like I said, this isn't as much about what you'll achieve immediately in the next few quarters, but just more to get a sense of how you look at leadership positions. The other thing, which I'll quickly touch upon, and I'm not sure failure is the right way to describe it, but the hopes that you had for your quadricycle, I don't think have been fulfilled. The Qute is not necessarily the success that you would have hoped for it to be. In your examination of that, and the regulatory bit, we all know it took 10 years for you to be able to, get the ability to manufacture and sell the product. But in your examination of why it didn't deliver what you wanted to, what have you learned? Is there anything that sort of has added to your understanding of markets, leadership, business?
So the short answer is you are right. We thought the Qute would do better than it did. In volume terms, which is only a few hundred a month, both domestic and exports put together. Having said that, I think once again, our principle was correct, which is we did not try to make a car. Then we would be stepping out of our Lakshman Rekha. We would have lost alignment. We would have strayed from frugality and modularity, and we would have paid a heavy price, as do truck companies that make cars or SUV companies that make two-wheelers. So we didn't make that mistake. We stayed with our, what are our two greatest assets? Our skill sets and our cost structure. So we stayed with the skill sets and the cost structure of the three-wheeler business and quote unquote put a fourth wheel on the three-wheeler in the process. Now, certainly the effort we put in or the capex we invested, which, our industry is not a capex heavy industry, unlike the car industry. But nevertheless, whatever effort we put in and money we put into that obviously has not been as productive as we would like it to be. But the good thing about it is that when you do not stray away from your core and you experiment out of your core, you might be nicked here and there, but you're not going to break anything. And that's exactly what has happened to Bajaj. I mean, whether it's the Qute or whether it's a few other things that may not have realized their potential, did not stop Bajaj from still becoming the most valuable two-wheeler company in the world. And that's my point, because every time you start with something like a KTM, which fortunately succeeded, or a Pulsar that succeeded, or a Qute which didn't go the distance, you are starting with a hypothesis, and there is nobody in the world who knows whether it is going to work or not. Now, what do? Do you therefore not experiment? Do you not try to push the envelope in some direction? Do you not take a risk? Do you become risk averse? The danger of doing that was that if somebody else had made the quadricycle before us, as some people were talking about making it, and had that worked, the bottom would have fallen out of our three-wheeler business, and we cannot afford that, because that's a hugely profitable niche for us. So I would say, in the overall context, just as you take an insurance policy in life and hope that you will never need to call that in, Qute was our insurance policy as far as the three-wheeler business is concerned. A few hundred rupees in insurance is okay. We can take that.
You might not have that luxury with the Chetak. And the reason why I say that is because, Rajiv, if I understand the industry correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the shift to electric vehicles is going to be one of the biggest metamorphoses or transformations that this industry is seeing, because it's going to impact everything from technology to manufacturing to the way you sell and communicate to consumers. And at this stage, the Chetak seems to be in very infant stages of that. Chetak is your bet on the future, but it still looks like a very small, tentative bet. It's like you're feeling your way through that market. Is that correct to say?
I wouldn't say so, because the Chetak is certainly our first move in that direction. And, like the Pulsar 20 years ago, I said then that it will start slow, but it will open up Bajaj 2.0, and which it did over time. And I think Bajaj 3.0 can ride in on the back of Chetak. Quantitatively, we are again making just a few hundred a month, but that is not, unlike in the case of Qute, that is not for want of demand. I mean, the marketing guys want 5,000 a month yesterday. But as you said, because the supply chain is very disrupted, particularly with semiconductors and stuff, so it will take us a little while to get there, and then we can roll it out across the top 30 cities in the country. Qualitatively, we are in a very good space, because I have seen many reports comparing the Chetak with other similar vehicles in the marketplace and suggesting that it is head and shoulders above everything else. So I think we've done the right thing by taking that small step forward for Chetak, which is a big big leap for Bajaj Auto. Having said that, yes, the next 1 year we will make every effort that we can to scale this up. And from there on, we have to then broaden the portfolio, as we did with the Pulsar, and bring in more products and more brands into the EV space. So I don't see ourselves at any disadvantage to anyone else, because somebody's making 500 a month, somebody's making 1,500 a month. Everybody's at the same point of the learning curve by and large. So I think that we are neither too early nor too late.
I'm just fascinated with seeing how different companies, different leadership are adapting to this, which is why I wanted to come to the question about, do you think this industry is from here on going to demand a very different style?
Yeah, so I think we will see some big changes associated with this transformation. Number one, you're going to have a whole new set of competitors as an organization. And you're going to have competitors out there who have access to lots of cheap money and who burn it on a daily basis. So how does an incumbent cope with that pressure? Each company has to find its answers for that. Number two, as we did with the shift in technology from scooters to motorcycles, once again, we will have to ultimately develop and internalize our own technology. I mean, we can't be buying the entire EV powertrain from suppliers and then hoping to make money selling it. This black box kind of approach is not going to work. That means Bajaj has to develop, as much as it did with the Pulsar, it has to develop its own technology with the Chetak, implement it both in terms of product and process in itself, as also in its supply chain, and implement it to quality and cost. I mean, it took us many years to get the cost structure of the motorcycle right. It's no secret that we lost money for the first several years when we collaborated with Kawasaki, starting mid-80s. So getting the cost structure right and getting the skill sets right, the two assets I talked about earlier, is going to be a second big challenge for the industry. And I think the third is that I anticipate is this, that every time there's a shift in core technology, it is invariably associated with a shift in what people call the form factor, the styling or the design of the vehicle. Think of when the Premier Padmini and Hindustan Ambassador gave way to the Maruti 800. It was a very different form factor. The Chetak gave way to a Splendor, a very different form factor. The Splendor gave way to an Activa, a very different form factor. So with the electric vehicle should come very different form factors. It will still ride on two wheels because it's a two-wheeler, but it will be a very different two-wheeler. And we are back to our discussion on being counterintuitive, because 99 out of 100 marketing people in the country will reject that form factor because they will say it doesn't exist out there. Who's going to buy it? So again, you have to have the conviction that you are standing on the right principles, that this is the differentiation which is going to make the impact. So I think these are the kind of issues that existing companies will have to deal with.
What do you think of what Tesla has achieved, Rajiv?
I think Tesla has done remarkably well, and they are not making small numbers anymore. I mean, if what I read is correct, that they made 250,000 vehicles almost in the last quarter. I mean, that's a rate of 1 million vehicles a year. 1 million vehicles a year at that price point puts them right up there with the Germans and Lexus and all the rest of it. So it's outstanding. I don't know how profitable or otherwise they are, but on every other metric.
Last year seems to have been a good one for them.
So that means they've got the secret sauce right.
And when you look at what you think that company has done correctly?
I think first and foremost it is this. If you go back to a movie called Sarkar, when the bad guys go to the Swami and say to him that we want to eliminate the Sarkar, the Swami gives a wonderful piece of marketing advice. He says, "Sarkar ko marne se pehle, Sarkar ke soch ko marna zaruri hai." Because if you destroy the aura around the person, then people don't care about the person. See, what is a brand? The soch, the story is the brand. The human body is the product. So why I say this is because why is it that the Nissan Leaf or the Toyota Prius or the Honda whatever, or the Chevy Volt or whatever it is, do not have fundamentally the same aura, the same charm as a Tesla? Because when you hear the name Tesla, you know that it occupies the singular position of an electric car. Every Tesla on the road is electric. Can you imagine a hybrid Tesla that also has a petrol and diesel engine in it? I mean, it's sacrilege. It's a sin almost, right? So the thing is that consumers are first and foremost reacting and responding to the brand position. That what a conviction, what a company, what a guy. They are willing to bet everything, on being electric. And of course, they made a fabulous product. That's always important. But engineers rarely fail a company. It's the business guys, the strategic guys, the marketing guys that fail the company most of the time. So I think that the very, very important thing for all of us is going to be not how we make a new form factor and a new battery and a new swapping or a new sharing. How do we first create a new perception? Because that is what consumers are looking for. That is what is most charming to them. I don't think the best way is to do a Nissan Leaf, because in the end of the day, a Nissan Leaf is just another Nissan. The same car presented differently. Think of BMW bringing the Mini back. They didn't call it a BMW Mini. They called it a Mini and gave it its own identity, its own personality. I think that is the piece that you have to figure out right. And that is important because then you're dealing with perhaps a new brand. You have to have an organization that is dedicated to that brand. You have to develop products that reflect or mirror what that brand stands for. You have to develop a distribution network where consumers can come in and experience that brand in terms of retail experience. Everything will be driven by that. So I think that is what they have got right in my view.
And that's what you're going to do for Chetak? Or is Chetak just dipping your toes in the water right now?
No, we have to do what we have thought of doing, which is not very dissimilar. We have brought back a brand which has been out of the market 15 years. We have stayed true to that brand. It's an all-metal scooter because that's what Chetak should be. It's a so-called classic or a modern retro or whatever, because that's what it should be.
But will young audiences connect with it, Rajiv? Chetak is like our parents' generation. You would be surprised. I mean, ask people. You would be surprised whether it's a Mini or whether it's a Chetak. It is not about what is slick or what is classic. It is about the charm of having your own position, your own identity. Now, obviously, no brand has 90% market share, so that's not going to happen. But from whatever I have seen,
Whenever we have researched the Chetak, the appeal is very, very broad. It's quite agnostic to age, gender, and all of that. And that's why we have built a exclusive organization headed by Eric Vaz that deals with the Chetak. We have taken the longer route of not putting the Chetak into the existing 600 Bajaj dealerships. We have put up specific Chetak dealerships. We call them the Chetak Experience Center. So it will be a slow build-up as we did with KTM, because we will be building from scratch the new brand, the new organization, the new distribution. But I think that is what works in the long term, and that seems to have worked for Tesla from whatever I can observe from the outside.
You'll have to destroy something to build something new, right, Rajiv? 20 years down the line, what is your vision of what you think Bajaj might be?
No, I think I like very much the definition of the job of a CEO that Al Ries wrote about in The Origin of Brands, where he said that the job of the CEO is to find the future in the current activities. So I'm not going to destroy any of the current activities of Bajaj. I have to simply evolve and adapt them to the way the market is moving or our anticipation of where the market is headed. So, in the past, the Chetak gave way to a Pulsar. Maybe in the future, a Pulsar will give way to a Chetak again. Maybe that is the circle of life, that tells us how to adapt.
Is that too incremental in a transformational space?
No, I don't think so.
No?
See, on the one hand, we have an existing Bajaj Auto with about a dozen motorcycle brands and about 3 brands in the 3-wheeler motorcycle space. We run a very efficient, very profitable organization. Incidentally, the most valuable in the world in its space. So we naturally got to keep this going. So we have to do our best for this, because nobody knows what the future will be. I mean, there are people who will tell you everything will be electric in 5 years, and there are people who will tell you it's not going to happen for 50 years. I will fall back again on the same principle of modularity and say to myself that we will keep ourselves ready to be able to switch from one to the other in whatever mix is required. So while we keep the existing show going, because we can't take the foot off that pedal, we have to at the same time build the future with Chetak and maybe with other electric brands. I mean, it's no secret, we have said that the Chetak platform will be used to build Husqvarna scooters, it will be used to build KTM scooters, and in fact, we are also working, with this Bangalore-based company called Yulu, that is today a market leader in micro-mobility. And they are today sourcing out of China, I believe, but tomorrow they will also source out of Bajaj, their requirement of product, which will again come from the Chetak platform. So I think we are doing quite a lot. Whether it's enough, time will tell.
One last question, Rajiv Bajaj, on the fact that you quote Jack Trout, you quote the Upanishads, you quote even the Sarkar movie, you talk of homeopathy, you speak of yoga. In this day and age, do you feel that everything you've absorbed about leadership over the last 3 decades will still be useful to you over the next 2 decades? Does Rajiv Bajaj himself need to change as he looks at how the marketplace around him is changing and so dramatically?
Well, as someone said, when you're willing to listen, everyone is a teacher. And I frankly found that whether it was homeopathy or yoga, I found that these are very deep sciences. And if they can successfully help a physician to manage somebody's wellness, to improve one's vitality inside out, without any suppression, then perhaps leaning on the same aphorisms by translating them into a management context should work equally well for the organization, and it's worked for me. And as much as yoga continues to evolve, homeopathy continues to evolve. I mean, my homeopathist just sent me day before his latest and newest book. I will read that again. I will learn from that, and hopefully I'll be able to apply something from that. So, as long as, I don't know if you remember, you asked me this question 20 years back when we did our first show together for Young Turks, and you said, what is the one thing that you will not leave home without? And I still remember the other guy on the show was Jyotir. Jyotir said what most people would, I think, my mobile phone. And I said to you, I will not leave home without an idea. So as long as you can wake up telling yourself, or asking yourself, what's my one idea for making one improvement today, I think you're in a good place.
And you, do you see yourself becoming, I'm going back to an earlier question that you put, where you said that it's going to take a while for you to be able to make it to number one in the domestic market. I'm asking you this as a personal goal, Rajiv. Is this something that you want to see happen in your leadership time?
No, not at all. See, first of all, I have never been fascinated with the number game. For me, it has always been interesting to create the new, to do something different, whether in terms of technology, products, or markets. And this thing about leadership, I never thought of myself as being the leader, as in the person who does most of the thinking and makes all the decisions and stuff like that. In fact, the quote I like best is that build a team so strong that people can't tell who the leader is. And I think I have a team that is that strong. Otherwise, we would not have a company that is as valuable as it is. And I once asked my homeopath, Dr. Rajan, this question, like I asked him all the difficult questions that that torment my mind. I said, how should leadership be? And he gave me such a beautiful answer. He said it should be like the flight of the bird across the sky. It's beautiful when it's there, but it goes without a trace. I mean, where is the need to leave behind your stamp, leave behind your identity, leave behind your trail? Not at all. You come, you do your best, and you move on. That is life. That is how it should be.
And that is the perfect note to end this conversation on. You've been very patient with the many questions I've asked you. Or maybe I'll get greedy and I'll ask you one. Do you write this stuff down? Like when you watch Sarkar movie and you see a dialogue, do you put it down and say, okay, the next time somebody asks me this, I'm going to quote it? Because you seem to pull out this incredible variety of references.
Yeah, so I'm still very old-fashioned in that respect. So this is my
diary. Write it down.
My black diary, and it is all written down here. And when I'm on a flight, or if I'm just sitting somewhere doing nothing, I will read through it, and I can tell you each thing, because these have come from the masters. So when Guruji Iyengar says structure follows function in the human body, if you have something that is not quite right, start functioning correctly, as in start standing correctly, sitting correctly, twisting correctly, stretching correctly, and your body will align. Now I am able to translate that to business and say that, why waste time talking about organization structure and roles and responsibilities and nonsense stuff like that, the classic HR stuff. Start doing the right thing. You want to make the best motorcycle in the world? This is what Shah Rukh told me, for example. He named some world famous director, I've forgotten his name. He said at the end of his book, he wrote this, that if there is one thing I have learned, it is this: we will all make a great movie if we are all making the same movie. So we will all make a great bike if we are making the same bike. And in the process of doing that, I think we will also build a great team. So these are the kind of profound things I have learned from great masters: Jack Trout, Dr. Rajan, Guruji Iyengar, Dr. Wallace, Yamaguchi-san, stuff like that. So I have to keep reading it because it is still taking me many years to understand it.
And it's all in your black book.
It's all in my black diary. And every time the year changes and the diary changes, I write it all again in the new diary. So that is my revision.
Wow. Has anybody offered to publish your diary?
Not yet.
All right, then. Rajiv Bajaj, thank you so much. I know we could have discussed profitability and whether this pandemic, what the recovery will be like in the months to come. But this has been a much richer conversation for the insight that you've given me in how you approach both the organization, the business, and your own personal management style. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for making it so. Thanks a lot, Menaka.
Thanks.